Okay, so today I'm recording this video to teach people how to make a beaded snowflake with a couple of different techniques. And, well, not techniques. Well, yeah, actually, techniques, but also slightly different pattern methods. Either one with 48 beads or ones with 54 beads. They have extra beads on the ends of each branch of the snowflake. And these snowflakes can be used for a number of things. Obviously, earrings, as you see here, cute little falling earrings. Um, they can also be attached together to make a bracelet, although it would be more delicate. You can use larger beads, such as these crow beads, to make an ornament. These are glow in the dark ones, so this snowflake glows in the dark. Although when using larger beads, you have to use different kind of thread. I'll be showing you how to make them with the seed beads for earrings, but I'll be using crow beads because it's easier to see how to do each step. And I got that idea from a YouTuber channel, Ren B, who does a peyote stitch, a tubular peyote stitch that she does it in crow beads and embroidery floss, and it is so bright and so visible. I said I need to start doing my videos that way as well. So we're going to be using crow beads, and really this snowflake. Oh, and you can also use it to make a snowflake garland for your tree. I beaded a long 12-foot strand for my mother, and every 6 inches, I had a little wire guard loop there that she could hook up a new snowflake, and I made her an advent calendar. I might show it in the video. Um, and so that she could open up a new snowflake each day and add it to her garland for her Christmas tree. So different things you can do. These are the simplest method of beading the snowflake that I have. And then you can always elaborate from there. But we'll get started with the easiest method, which is the 48 one. And then I'll show you how to do the 54 method as well at the end when I'm finished showing the main body of this. Okay, so I will put these aside. This one, by the way, just has the jumpring on it, and it can be put on a necklace as a pendant, or I can attach it later, make another one, and make earrings. So I'm going to put this aside. I'll put this aside. First, we're going to start off with the supplies that you need. And if you got a kit from First Nations House or I mailed one out to you, this is more or less what you'd be getting in your kit. You'd have your thread. For the seed bead snowflakes, such as these ones, I'm using nymo double O thread. This is the thinnest of the nymo beading thread. You don't really want to use sewing thread because it's not as strong and you're going to be tying knots and pulling those knots very tight. And using the double O, since I'm using seed beads and not Delica, Delica can cut them or bugle beads can cut the thread, so you want to use a thicker one. But I'm using the double O because we go through these some of these beads several times, and plus with the knots that we're going to be tying, it's best to have the thinnest of the thread for that. And it's pretty strong, you'll see. Though you can use others, and keep in mind, the smaller the bead, and you're going through it several times, and if it's a check bead, the holes might be very tiny. So those are the considerations you want to have. And you'll see in this video why that makes a difference. I often will use the Miyuki size 11, but I've also used size 15. These at the tips are size 15, so sometimes I mix and match. Or I'll use a check bead size 10. I also use check 11, which this one is a check bead size 11 plus a Miyuki size 11. And the holes are smaller, but it's still okay with the nymo double O thread. But when you get into smaller than this, such as Charlotte's or sometimes even the size 11s or Benacrete beads, they're nice and round, but the holes are pretty small, so it can be difficult to go through several times. So I will also use the check size 10, but if you got a kit from us, you either got check size 10 beads or the Miyuki size 11. You also got a beading needle. And then in this package of beads, I also gave some hardware. So let me just move this over here. Dump out all the beads. One nice thing to do if you're getting a kit from me, you don't have too many colors mixed up together, but it's nice to sit there and just sort them on a piece of felt with a paintbrush and just slide them into their different piles. I'm not going to be doing that today, but you can do that. It's a nice little meditation sort of relaxation exercise. And then you can also get a feel for the beads and see what kind of design you want to make. So I sent these earring hooks. This is a kidney wire style surgical steel. And some jump rings. I should be about 6 or 8 in there to add to the snowflakes. You can add it to the earring or whatever else you want to add it to. And then 3 or 4 different shades of beads. So we've got blue that has a finish on it. These are all Miyuki. A matte white. I really like the matte white. In fact, it's chalk white matte. Really like those for the beading of the snowflakes. It just looks really awesome, stellar, a lot like snow. And then there's also these white lined colored ones. You can't really see it very well, but that's a Miyuki one. It's white lined clear ones with AB finish on it. So it has a rainbowy look to it. It really looks like snow as well. And then there's a silver lined clear one as well. So that's what you would have got. Although you might have got different colors if you got a kit from me. But there's at least 3 to play around with. And I like to do most every earring with only 2 colors because there's not that many beads. It gets too messy if you use too many. Although you can also use just the one. That's the color of the white lined clear beads with the rainbow finish on it. I'm going to bring that up a little. I don't know if it'll get the rainbow finish on there, but hopefully it can. Okay, so I'm going to move this aside because I'm going to do the small beaded one, the seed bead one, alongside the crow bead ones, but I'm just going to push it aside for now. And I'll also show you that these ones aren't completely done yet, but this is a size 9 bead that I got from a bead store in Toronto for a really low price because most people don't use size 9s. And these are a size 8 bead, so 8 is larger than 9. 11 is smaller. That's how it goes with beads. So yeah, you can get some bigger snowflakes as well. This one's all silver lined clear, so real bright and shiny, but not a lot of definition on it. But yeah, so there's a couple other examples. But I'm going to be making it with crow beads. So I have my beading needle and thread. For this, I'm going to be using an embroidery floss and an embroidery needle, these crow beads, couple colors. These are my versions of jump rings for the large snowflake. You will also need a little pair of snips to snip your thread, of course. You may need pliers, though not always. If your jump ring is already completely closed, you can just incorporate it into your work without having to open and close it, but this can be useful. Also, so these are rounded pliers that are good for curling wire without leaving marks. And then I use these other ones to grip things, but this can leave marks, so you might want to put some masking tape over it. That was a suggestion from a friend. And you may or may not need them, depending on what you're doing with your snowflakes. And then some people like to also use a little bit of wax on their thread. If you are going to use wax on your thread, and I don't use it for my snowflakes, but it can add a stiffness, though I like to add the stiffness with a little bit clear coat of nail polish to the back of the earrings. If you are going to use it, though, I recommend that you only pass it through once, like like that, just once. I use a candle, beeswax candle sometimes. Other times I'll use my actual sewing beeswax, but just have it go through once because you don't want it to get too thick and gummed up in there because, like I said, we're going through several times and we're tying a lot of knots, and then those knots can get a little challenging if there's too much beeswax. So now we have all our supplies. Oh, and for the seed beads, by the way, you will only need you only need 48 seed beads or 54, but really that translates, you could probably get a pair of earrings, so 2 snowflakes, out of just over 1/8 of a teaspoon. So to do one, you need less than 1/8 of a teaspoon of seed beads. That should be enough in size 10 and 11 seed beads. Okay, so, and I say teaspoon because that's an easier measurement. Most people don't have scales. So I went through and measured all the different seed beads. How much was in a teaspoon? And I have that listed somewhere. Okay, so what we're going to start with is threading your needle. It seems pretty simple for a lot of people. But I'm just going to show you a couple techniques for people who haven't really threaded a needle before. Even if you've never sewn or beaded or anything, this is a pretty easy one to start with. It's only a 3-layer earring, so it's pretty simple. You need, I like to cut about 1 meter of thread to do 2 to 3 snowflakes. So 1 meter is, well, 100 centimeters, obviously, but I think about it more or less like 3 feet or 1.5 arms length, I guess, somewhere around there anyways. And I use that much. And some of you, well, most of you would have gotten a size 16 needle, so it will fit through all your beads. And your thread should fit in there pretty good. I use the size 16 because it has actually a rather large eye on the head of it. So it's a little bit easier to thread, but that doesn't mean it's super easy. So I highly recommend when you're beading or when you're threading your needle, it's good to cut your thread on an angle. That little bit can help get it through. And then also, you won't see me doing this because I'm putting it up to my mouth, but I always get this a little moist so that the threads, because all threads are made up of several strands, so they all stick together that way. So I just did that. And then sometimes you might even need to flatten it so that you have a flat, sort of wet, pointy end to your thread. And some of you might also need reading glasses, which I will for the beading needles, but not this one. This one's pretty large. And good lighting. Or you can use a magnifying lamp. That's another good choice. Put it through there. And that's pretty much it. It's best to have it come down, at least halfway, but you're not tying any knot. Not yet, anyways. So you're just having it go through once, and then your needles thread it. All right, so now I'm going to get the beads ready. I often like to have all my colors out at once that I'm working with so that I can go back and forth. All right, so I'll put that out of the way. And this is done in 3 layers. There's an inside layer, a second layer, and then the outer layer, like this. All right. So this inside layer I'm going to do with these glow-in-the-dark crow beads. Then the second layer I'll do with blue. And then the third layer I'll do with these clear ones again, so that you can see the difference between the layers when I'm referring to them. So you start off with just putting 12 beads on. And I'm going to use all one color here, but for this one and this one here, I alternated. So I did a silver and white, silver, white, silver, white for 12 beads. And I did a blue, white for 12 beads. And these will create different looks, and you'll see the pattern afterwards. But for now, we're just keeping it simple with 12. So there's 6. I need 6 more. 3 more. All right. So I have 12 beads. You want to be mindful and hold on to your end because it doesn't have a knot and you don't want it yet. You're about to tie a knot. And mindful of the other end. Pull them through towards one end there. And with about, that's about 4, maybe 4 or 5 inches. Even you can get away with 3 if you're short on thread. You're going to start to tie this knot together. Now, like I said, I'm going to do it also with the seed beads on the side. So I'm just going to pick up my 12 here, 12 white. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, so I have my 12 beads here as well. So I'm going to put that one there so you can see it when I go to tie it. Really what you're going to do is you're going to tie this as a ring and you're going to basically tie it 3 times. For these large beads, I will be tying it once, then again, and you want to make sure that you're gone to the right spot. It can sometimes jump over in between beads with the smaller beads. I'll show you in a second. So I've made that kind of tight before I tighten the second one so that you have a relatively tight ring. It doesn't have to be super, super tight. And then I go one more time, a third time. Now, it's not so much necessary for the cotton because the thread's not going to move and whatnot. But for the nymo thread, and this is a good thing, I'm just going to place this on top. For the nymo thread, so I have, a few inches at the end here, and this is my needle end. When I tie this, I'm going around once, and this is a key thing to get the hang of. I know it's just a knot, but so I go through once, but I don't go all the way down yet because the beads can jump around a whole bunch. And with the beading thread, you can get away with this because it'll slide over nicely. I start to tie that second one, and I can go all the way down, and even though I want it to be a tight thing, it'll tighten up. So just keep pulling. It's strong thread. And then that way you got your nice, tight first layer. If it's still loose, you can continue to pull it. See, I'm pulling quite a bit. You can see the blood in my fingers from the pulling tight. It's strong thread, nice and strong. So that's twice, but because it moves so smoothly, which we like, we're going to have to do it a third time so that it doesn't undo or loosen up too much. And for this third one, you're going to want to make sure that you're coming out at that the threads are both there so that when you pull it tight, it's not going to go to the wrong spot and get caught around a bead. So there's a third one. So now that's nice and tight. It'll be easy for me when I'm adding my second layer. So both of them are ready to go for their second layer. And layer number 2, you're just adding 6 points all the way around. To do this, all you need to do is pick up 3 beads, skip one of these beads, skip that first one. So where the knot is, you skip one, you go through the second bead in the second layer. And there's your first point. Now it's going to be loose and it'll loosen up several times. We're going to do this 5 more times. And when we come back here, we're going to tie this knot again 3 times. And then that'll keep the second layer in place. So 1, 2, 3. Skip that bead, go through the next one. So you're going through every other bead. Now, if you've alternated your colors back and forth, it's possible that you started on the wrong side, and when you added 3 beads, you had the wrong bead here that you didn't want here. You wanted this bead there, or sorry, this bead there. You could take it out and do it again. I mean, most often if I have a mistake, I will completely take it out, like the last step, or go all the way back, and I'll just keep taking the threads out, because trying to weave back through again, you could actually sew into the thread, and it causes more problems. So, but if you're just doing it like this, it doesn't matter which way you go. You just need to skip a bead when you go back in again. So 1, 2, 3, skip a bead. And sometimes they'll even pop up the ones that you have to go through. It's just something of the feature of the beads, the shape of the beads. Not all beads are like that, but some will pop through. 1, 2, 3. We're almost done our second row. Now, having a long thread can also be a problem because it can tangle. So you will want to do these things a little more slowly, delicately if you can. It looks like I caught up with something. I'm not sure what that was all about, but I will try and pull this through. See how loose this all gets? It's all right, because we're going to pull it all tight soon. And it won't get as loose on your seed beads, because these are heavy, and it's causing it to, the weight is causing it to loosen up when I lift it up. All right, so those are the last 3 beads. You're going to go through this last bead, and you will end up, I just want to bring this up to see. You will end up where the knot is when you go through that last one. All right, so that is the second row done, second layer done. And I'm just going to tie this once, pretty tight. Tie it twice. And then, even though the cotton doesn't need it, I'll show you 3 times just because I want you to learn for the seed beads, right? And then for the seed beads, I already had this one ready to go. So I'll put this back on top again. Oops, sorry. Okay. Actually, first I'll just show you here in the smaller beads. So there's my knot. That's where my thread's coming out. And I pick up 3 blue beads and skip that one next to the knot and go through the second bead. You'll see sometimes it'll just be flat like this and not go through very well. You have to sort of pull at the middle bead there to make it come to a point. That happens sometimes. It's easy to get out, but you do want to make sure it's points. They're all points when you're tying it tight, right? Because otherwise your snowflake will look rather limp. And so I added 3 beads, skip that one that it came out of, or sorry, skip the one next to the one it came out of, and go over to the next bead. And so on and so forth until you've done 6 around there. I'm just going to put that off to the side because I already have those 6 ready. So that now I'm about to tie a knot. So I'm even going to loosen that up there just to show you that was the last 3. So I'm pulling it tight, and I'm back to where the knot is. And now I'm going to tie it once. And this part you want to be careful because You do want to make sure that you're tying it and not getting around other beads. So I'm sure I'm not there. So that's once. I pull it tight. Sometimes the points will move around a little, like poke up because it's so tight. So, but that'll show more on the second tie. So this is the second time around tying and making sure that I'm going through there. So I do it gently. And now I'm pulling it quite tight. Now you'll want to do this, and if you're using a different thread, like a non-nymo, such as like a clear sewing thread, which is a plastic, if you tie it too tight, it could either break or it'll twist the whole thing into a weird way. So really, this is the best things that you can use for making a seed bead snowflake is these nymo thread. You could also use fire line, but when you're tying that tight, you're going to have to be careful that it's not too tight again, because what happens when it's too tight is it can do this, right? So right now, this is beading thread and it did this. With plastic or a fire line, which is really, really durable, that will make it twist even more if you tie it too tight. Now with this one, because it is a nymo, I know it will stretch just a little bit, so I'm going to end up just sort of stretching it out and laying it flat, and I'll use some clear nail polish on one side to make sure that it stays flat later. But that's just an example of it being tied too tight. So we've got 2 times on there, and now this is our 3rd time not. Now the reason why we do 3 again, it's to make sure it doesn't slide out of place. Okay, so that's the 2nd layer on that one done and ready to go for the 3rd layer. And this is the 2nd layer on this one done. So let's now go to our 3rd layer. And so there's 2 methods for doing this one. We can do it so that we'll only have 3 on the end of each branch, or we can do it so that we have 4. Now I'm going to show you the 3 first, and when we add the jumpring, that will show you in some ways the 4th method, but then I'll show you the 4th method as well, or the method with 4. So you're done your 2nd layer, you just tied your 3 knots. Now you're going to go up through the 2nd layer, the first 2 beads on the first point. So you're coming out at the point. You go through 1, 2, come out through here. Now you add 3 beads again. And you're not going back in this hole or that one. You're going in this bead this way. The same way you just came through, you're sort of making a loop and going around again. So let me do that. Pull it through. And that's the end of the one. You go through the 3rd bead on the first point of the 2nd layer. Then you go through that 1st layer bead again that you had gone through already before to make your 2nd layer. Let me just pull this through to make it easier to see. So now we're going through this bead, and we're going to come up to this point as well. So I often will do all 3 at once. So it's going through the 1st layer and then 2 beads in the 2nd layer on the 2nd point. All right, we add 3 more beads. And again, we're making a loop. So we're going back through this last bead we just went through. Down through the rest of that layer there. The 2nd layer bead. And then back through that 1st layer bead that we'd gone through before, and the next 2. I'm just going to pause so you can see. So we went through that 1st layer, and then the 2nd layer, we're going through the first 2 again in the 3rd point. Add 3 more beads. Go through Again, we're making that loop. So we're going through that last bead again. Down in through that second, through that other bead on the second layer. Through the first layer again, and up through the next 2 beads on the second layer. That's looks like the 4th point. Now, I'm going to show you what I like to do. I like to add the jump ring at this stage. The reason why is because in the seed bead version, the non-large crow bead version, this is the perfect time to get these 3 anchored in place so that they're nice and tight, and not gonna, end up laying loose and limp and fall to the side or fall down. And so I like to add the jump ring at this stage because you secure the jump ring 3 times, and so then that ends up making these tighten up and stay in place, and then you do a couple more, and then you tie the knot. So that way it's not, well, how do I explain this? I guess the best way to explain this is maybe this one. I don't know how well you can see, but this thing is sort of contorted. Now, it's not too tight, because see, it's quite smooth and it can all bend one way and everything. It's that I didn't tie in between each layer. So when I pull this tight, it's pulling that tighter and that tighter, like if I pull this out. But it can also pull the second layer and then the first layer. So because all these layers are dependent on the tightness of the final thing, it ends up being this, ends up being a bit of a challenge. So if you can secure these bits, because those are the ones that can go loose the easiest, halfway through your row, then it's useful to do. You don't have to. And some beads it won't matter, and some of you are good at picking out all the right size beads from your seed beads and whatnot, that you'll get the hang of it and figure out how to do it. But I find that this is the best time, I think, to add the jump ring so that these end up being a little bit tighter. And also to tighten this one, I'll often, like tighten the ones before, I'll pull the one next to it, and then I'll pull the next one tight, and then I'll pull my string tight. Now, you'll see that with these crow beads, it's wanting to go to the side like this, but really it's kind of this barrel shape of these, so it might happen to Tohos as well, or some of your thicker barrel-shaped beads. But really, we want these points to end up sort of like a little bit of a V there, at least for this style. The other style, they'll end up straight across. Okay, so now what I'm doing to add the jump ring, I only pick up 2 beads. And looks like I need to give myself a little more thread as well. So I'm going to move that down a little. So I pick up 2 beads. Then I pick up my jump ring, which I'm using a keychain ring for this. Then I go down through that last bead that I just came out of, so that I'm catching it. Oop. Now you'll want to make sure that you're seeing this well enough so that you don't end up having your jump ring end up over there. So it helps to, until you get the hang of it anyways, helps to have it out of place. So I'm going only through that last one, the second bead I added. And I'm going back the other way, not the same way. I'm not making a loop. I'm going back. I almost unthreaded. All right. So you see there, it'll pull tight, or you pull it tight, I guess. And the jump ring gets caught in there. Now I add my 3rd bead. And I'm not touching this. I'm going through this one. So I'm still making that loop. I just did the jump ring in between. So I make the loop, and I come through here. And so you can see that it can tighten these ones when you do that. So I'm gonna tighten it even just a little bit more because these things can get loose easy. And don't expect your first snowflake to be perfect. So I came out of there. Now I want to go through that 2 more times to secure the jumpring in. So again, I'm going to go up through those 2. Go through the jumpring, back through this second bead, back through the third one, back into the second row again, that middle bead, the point, and then one more time. And sometimes you can do these both at the same time, the 2 beads at the same time. See, up through these 2, through the jumpring, back down through the barrel, or through the, sorry, that second bead there. So now you have, see, you have it through there 3 times. So that's good and strong. I mean, they're not supposed to take a whole bunch of weight anyways, but back through this third bead for the last time, through this middle bead on the second layer for the last time. And the whole time that you're doing those 3, you're always going to want to pull it tight because these can end up loosening, the ones before, but also this. You pull it tight and make sure you're repositioning so that, you know, these 2 beads are in between this, or sorry, this bead is in between these 2, and this one is centered over top. So, and that the jump ring is in the right position. Also, if you have a jump ring and it's open a little bit, you're going to want to make sure that it doesn't slide out because this will end up undoing this layer, right? So you got to make sure the jump ring doesn't come out. So I always make sure that the hole or the cut part is closed beforehand, but also make sure that it's facing over here, away from the thread potentially coming out. All right, so this is pretty tight. And then you go back in to your second layer here on your last bead on that point on the second layer and back through that first layer again. And we're going to finish up by doing these 2 points, but I'm just going to pause for a second. Actually, no, I'm not going to show you that part now. Let's just finish this up. So we're going to finish this up going through this one here, the second layer and the next one. And we're just repeating the same steps we've done for here and here and here, and close to the same steps as here. So yeah, 3 more beads. Making a loop. So you're going to make that loop, you go through that bead again in the same direction you went through it before. And finish going back through the second layer, back down into the first layer, and up through the second layer on the last point. Whoop. See how it caught around there? Because I wasn't paying attention. And that can happen, and it can also happen without you even realizing it. So it doesn't really end up showing until you're tying your knot at the end, and you're like, why is it twisted or folded over or whatever? It can be your thread because this is practically invisible to some extent, especially when you're working with white beads. So keep an eye out for that. If it's twisted, that could be the reason why. Also, it could be that, you know, it got twisted that way, or a common situation that happens, and I'm just going to do it on purpose right now, is that people will pick up 3 beads and then go back in the way that they came out. And I'll show you what that looks like. It looks like that. So you might not totally notice right away, but then when you try and align them all, let me get this out of the way. When you try and align them all so that they're all like nicely pointed ends, and this won't work. It's because you went in the wrong way. So I'm going to take my thread off my needle. This is what I do when I make a mistake because it's just easier. I've found it's easier than trying to sew it back through. It's better just to rethread your needle again. I pull the thread out. I'm going to get it moistened again and flatten it. Put that through. Okay, we're almost done. So we have those 3 beads. We're going to make the full loop by going through that second bead the same way we went through the first time, in the same direction. And then go back through the last bead on the second layer. And the last bead on the first layer. And now we will tie our knot 3 times again. 1. And I'll tie it pretty tight, but not super tight, because I will want to undo these later. I'm not keeping it with the orange thread. As funky as it is, this is just for visibility's sake. Okay, so that was 1 time, and I have them all, relatively taut and in position. And I'm just going to take that needle out because I'm done with that. I'll tie it now the second time. And that's where you're really going to pull it tight to get those last couple ones that you put on nice and in position. And then I will tie it a 3rd time. Now, you can probably see that there is like a bunch of knots in there. So that's the reason why you want to make sure you're using a thin enough thread, but strong enough so it can't be sewing thread. It has to be a beading thread because that's a real strong monofilament, meaning really, really strong for thin thread. And then you're going to tag in your ends, which I'm going to have to thread this one more time. And so I've tied it 3 times, and all I do to tag in my ends is I just make sure it goes through, being careful not to catch the other beads. Oh, and look, I unthreaded myself there. That's why you want to have enough of an end here, is so that you can get through at least a few times, though I like to go through that whole first layer. Just go all the way back through it. Sorry, my threads are being a little funky. Okay. So I like to go all the way around before I cut it off. So I'm going to cut that one there, being careful not to cut the other one. Take that thread out. Now I'm going to thread my needle with the original tail to this snowflake. And I often will go in the opposite direction for the other end. And my needle is very long, so it's probably not going to get all the way around and still stay threaded. So I'll go as far as I can. Good enough. I went through at least, I think, 7 or 8. And then you cut off that end. And there is your snowflake. Now, of course, you probably won't have orange thread, but I mean, you could still play with the colors of your thread if you have clear beads. Maybe you could use a different color of nymo beading thread or a silvery one. There's a lot of different colors of beading thread, actually. But, white should do it too. And so that's that snowflake with the jump ring there. Now, if you forgot to add your jump ring, That's fine too, and you just have all those points there. You can also add your jumpering afterwards. Sometimes, first of all, I'm going to pretend like this is a jump ring and I use my pliers to open it. Sometimes the jump rings can fit right through the bead. And sometimes, if I want to do that, I will make sure that at least one of these middle beads on the branch, at the tip of the branch, has a big hole in it. So I will look through all my seed beads, whichever color I'm using, and I'll select one that has a really large hole to make sure that the jump ring can get through. And Miyuki's pretty good for this, actually. They can have some pretty big holes for jump rings to go through, so they did in this case. I got the jump ring through a size 11 seed bead, and also size 10 check. You can probably get it through. But even if you can't, then there's another way to add it. So you can have your threads, your end threads, and you just go to one of the tips. Even though you're done tying it, you go through one of the tips, or you can add a thread afterwards. You go to one of the tips and you essentially tie. Well, you know what? I'm going to show you with this, actually. Now, realistically, this could be a Star of David, but this could even be a snowflake here if you wanted it to be. So let's pretend that we're done this and we forgot to add the jump ring, and we're just going to add it now. So you just have your thread get to the tip of wherever you want to add your jump ring. And now I'm going to add the jump ring afterwards, and basically it's almost like sewing it onto the bead. So I've come out the tip, the middle bead on the second layer point. I pick up my jump ring. Again, you want to make sure that any opening isn't going to have the thread come out. And you're going to go back through that last bead again, and you're going to do that, go through this bead a few times. This one and the jump ring a few times. So you're basically sewing it onto the bead. All right, so it's like that. It'll get loose at least the second time you start to put it through. Oh, goodness gracious. Sometimes these threads can be a little tricky. All right, that's the second time I pulled it tight. And now it won't really get loose now, unless I'm specifically trying to pull it loose. So I go through the jump ring again, and through that bead one more time. Whoop. And then I just weave it in, or I can go through here, come all the way back and tie a knot. But really, it's in there pretty tight. And so quite often what I'll do at this stage is I'll just go through the 3 threadings that we went through there. I'll go through it partway and finish it off as a knot, like that. And then I'll weave my ends in, and I'll weave this end in, and then it's done. And keep in mind that that has your jump ring aligned this way. So when you're putting it on earrings, you might have to turn the loop that it hooks onto or other things. But this will also string onto a chain nicely as well, so that you can have your necklace go through there. But I'm going to undo this because I also want to show you the other method. So now I'm going to show you the other method that has 4 beads at the end of each branch on your petal. And really, it's basically like adding the jump ring, but the jump ring instead is a bead. And then I'll show you how to actually add the jump ring on top of those 4 beads. So let me just thread my needle again. And just like every other time, you ended your second row, second layer, row, whatever you want to call it, right there. You're going to come up through the first 2 beads on the second layer. You're going to add 3 beads, whichever colors you want. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, just so that you can see this clearer, I'm going to add 2 of my glow-in-the-dark whitish beads. And then I'm going to add my blue bead for the tip. And I'm just going to show you with the seed beads which design I'm doing. I'm doing the 3 beads plus the blue bead at the very tip. So you've added your 2 beads, your 2 white, then I add my blue, and just like the jump ring before, you skip that last bead and you go back through that second one that you added in the opposite direction. And you pull that through. Add your 4th bead. And then go back into your second layer. Also, you're completing that loop. So you're going to go back through the same way you went through the first time to complete that loop. And then it's at this stage that you'll want to sort of position, like I said before, you're going to want to position the middle of this, all these align like that. And you pull it tight, and it'll stay better than the other way of doing it when you only added the 3. That part will stay better because this is holding it tighter as well. You go back through that last bead on this point in the second layer, so that's the 3rd bead in the second layer. And then you go through that first layer as well, like you did before to add the second layer. Back up through these 2 in the second layer so that you're on the next point, the second point. And when you pull this tight, you'll see it position itself. Sometimes it'll even pop up like that. So you want to make sure it's pretty tight so that it stays in place. You add 2 beads, 2 of the white, and your 3rd bead. In this case, I've chosen blue. You put that blue one aside and go back through the second one you added of the white. And pull that taut. Add 1 more white bead. And again, you're completing the loop. It looks a little weird at this stage, but you're completing the loop. You've come through that second one back the way that you came in. And you're completing this loop and going through the same way you went through the first time so that it completes the loop. Pull it taut. And do this, go through the second layer again to finish off that branch. Go through the first layer and the next 2 on the second layer point to start that 3rd branch. And I pull taut all the way through. Sometimes you'll have to reposition them as well. It's a little bit different for the crow beads because, like I said, they're barrel shaped. All right, so I pick up 2 beads of the white, and then I pick up my blue. So there's 3. I skip the blue, put it aside, go back down through the second bead, add 1 more, As always, pulling taut, pulling taut. I'm going to give myself a little more thread. Finishing off the loop, going through that point one more time in the same direction so that it's closing the loop. Pulling taut again. Back down through here, down through the second layer, finishing off that. Going through that first layer again, and the first two on the second layer, and that point. Okay, and again, I like to add the jump ring at the fourth point because it helps keep these staying taut. And right now this one loosened up a bit, so I'm going to pull the one next to it, and the one next to it that's closest to the current leading thread. But, you know, sometimes I might pull the second one and then the third one so that the first one gets tight, and then the second, and then the third. All right, so I've pulled those pretty tight. I'll end up repositioning them again shortly, but that's good for now. So I pick up my two beads that are white. I pick up my blue bead, and then just like before with the jump ring, I pick up the jump ring, and then this time I will be going through the blue bead and the second white bead, and I'll be going back down them like this, okay? And just like the other ones before, I add my fourth bead after I've gone back down through, and I go through the second layer, this blue bead, and the second layer, closing that loop. But because it's my jump ring, I'm going to go through this 2 more times, the exact same thing 2 more times. And now the second time I go through, this is when I do want to make sure that I've got all my layers taut, all my branches taut that come before it. So you just want to make sure, because then it'll be harder to tighten up anything that came before it after we do this second time. So it's all pretty tight. I'm going to go back up through that first bead I added, the second bead I added, the third bead. So I can do them all 3 at once currently. Can't always, but I can right now, so I will. And again, this is a good chance to pull it taut because you won't get to once you go back down again. Well, it won't. It'll be harder anyways, significantly harder. So I went through the jump ring. Now I'm going to go back down through here, the blue bead, back down through this white one, which was the second one that was added. And I'm coming out because now that these are in position, it's kind of harder to get all of them at once, especially because I pulled it tight. So I'm going to now go through that fourth bead, and I'm going to go around one more time. So I'll complete the loop by going through the middle bead on the second layer. And about this time, you might find it easier to definitely be holding it. So I'm going to go through the first, a second, and third bead again. And so this is why it's good to have that thinner thread, but also the strong thread. Going through the jump ring, or in this case, a keychain ring. Going back down the blue, down the white one. And down the fourth one that was added, white one, in the third layer. Going back through that second layer again. You'll see it's slightly twisted to the side. We're going to have to position that a little bit over. But it can be harder to do once you've done 3 layers of this. But I went through that to close that loop, and now I'm going to go back through that second layer and into that first layer again, just to get the thread pulled downwards so that I can shift these. I can shift them a little bit. I can't shift it a lot, but I can shift it a little bit. That's why you kind of want to have these in place ahead of time, because once you've gone through that 3 times, it becomes difficult. And we want it to be difficult because we don't want it to loosen up. So we're back in that first layer. We're going to go through that second layer again to get to that middle bead. 1, 2, white, 1 blue. Skip that blue, go through the white. Threads can twist, and it can be a little frustrating when they twist. And sometimes what I'll do when they're twisted up is I'll just hold the work up and I'll just it's almost like squeezing the thread through as though you're wringing it out, and let it untwist a bit. Let my work hang there. It doesn't work for everything, but it does work for this. So I've untwisted it some, adding that 4th bead. Oh, it looks like I flipped it over. Adding that 4th bead and going back through that middle bead on the second layer, closing the loop, or completing the loop, I should say. All right. And so this one is kind of loose, but we'll tighten it up, and we'll get it also when we tie it 3 times at the end. So now I'm going to go back through that second layer to get back to that first layer. And then I'm going to the last point on the second layer to add that branch. Oh, look at my thread went around there, so I want to be careful. Helps that it's all orange, but when you have that white thread there with the white beads, it can be kind of difficult. Okay, add 1 white, 2 white, and 1 blue, like we've done before. Skip that blue and go back down through that second white one. Add 1 more white. Close off your loop by going through that second layer in the same direction you went through that bead already. Tighten it up. Go through that last bead on the second layer. Last bead on the first layer, so that you end up back at the knot. And now I'm going to tie it once so that I can get it nice and tight, the branches tight. All right. Really, it's just the last 2 that's going to affect. And this wasn't centered, so I obviously have to move it over some. All right, let's see. Does that help? There we go. Okay, so that's tied once. This will be the second time. And then a third time. And now I just tag in the ends. And you see, it's a bit tight, but it's enough that it can lay flat. Again, these are the crow beads. With the seed beads, when I'm pulling it tight, and here I've added, I've added the 4 petals already. It looks like I'm going to do the jumpring on the 5th petal. But when I pull it tight here, really you want it so that these branches are at least a little bit harder to move up and down, if you can help it. So this one will just flop over like that. So obviously that's not tight enough. So in order to get that one tighter, I'm going to pull the one next to it that's the closest to the thread that's next to it. On the edge, the leading edge. So even though that's close to here, that's not where the thread's coming out. The thread's coming out from this side. So I'm pulling this branch that's close to it. You see how loose I Made that one really, really loose. So I pulled that, and that one made that one tighter. And then I pull the one next to it there to tighten up the other one. And eventually it ends up you have to pull the leading thread that you're using. All right, so, and sometimes you might have to do that a few times. And I do that by putting my nail in between there and sort of tugging at it, and then tugging at the next one. And then also holding this taut while I'm doing that. So I do that a few times and make sure that all these beads are positioned. And I'll be adding the beads and then the jumpring here, and then going back in, adding that petal, and then tying it off to finish. So that's with the seed beads as far as tightening goes. Tying it always 3 times with the nymo thread because you don't want it to slip out of the place. And as I said, I'm just tagging in my ends. And the reason why you're doing that is because you, oh, wrong one, is because you don't want to have your thread cut too close to the knot because it can undo. So really you're just tagging this in so that you can have enough ending of your thread. So I only did it a bit there, and then I'll moisten the end here to thread the needle. And I go in the opposite direction usually. But you know, your knot might make it difficult. It won't here for these crow beads because these holes are just huge. But for your check size 11 beads, it might be very difficult to get through that knot. And if it is, you can potentially force it. And sometimes I'll even go through the knot so that the thread is in there nice and tight. But you can potentially force it through that first one. If you're having trouble, sometimes I'll just take my pliers and pull the needle through. You might lose a needle that way though if you're forcing it too hard. All right, I'm going to tag in a few more. That should be enough. You want to at least go through, like with the seed beads, you want to go through at least 4 or 5 beads, but I like to go the whole way around on the inside and again on the other side. All right, so we have our 2 methods. Of making snowflakes. One's with just this bit at the end. And again, these will move around quite a bit for the crow beads, but if you pull them tight enough for the seed beads, you should be okay. You might need some repositioning. And often, well, what I've started taking to doing anyways is actually I should probably move this over so you all can see better. I've taken to making sure that they're all in the right position, and then taking clear nail polish and a piece of parchment paper, and I paint one side, not both sides. I usually just do one. Some people do both sides, and then let it dry on the parchment paper because then it's easy to get off. Sometimes you'll have little bits that you have to sort of flick off, but that'll make it much firmer. But that being said, if you are using clear nail polish and you got a kit from us, you might have those matte chalk white Miyuki beads like they are here. So that's why I'm only putting it on the back and a little bit lighter, and like a lighter coat so that it doesn't seep through too much. And that's because this is a matte bead, and if I put the shiny nail polish on it, then it'll make the matte bead shiny. And I actually like it matte because then it, you know, it lends focus to these shinier baby blue sort of colored beads. Well, I don't know, baby blue, very pale blue beads. And then they sort of pop out a little bit more. Same thing with the silver. Although I will say the nice thing about the the matte beads of the Miyuki is it actually, when you're pulling it taut, it will stay taut a little bit easier than the shiny beads, because it has a little bit more friction. It's subtle. People who use a lot of different kinds of beads will know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so once you have the jump ring, you can attach it to your earring hook. If you have the ones I give you in a kit, then this part is kind of open. So when I put the jump ring onto the earring, I will make sure that I can close that loop up so that the jump ring doesn't come off when you open up the earring, so that it's on there good. Otherwise, it can just slide right off of your hook. But with the other fishhook earrings, or if you're putting it on a bigger jump ring to add to a necklace, or you can put a few, like a jump ring on either end, and connect the jump rings along and make a bracelet. There's a bunch of different things you can do with these snowflakes once you have them done and jump ring on. And again, if you forgot to add your jump ring, you can sew it on afterwards. A little bit more of a pain in the butt, and you end up seeing the thread. It shows a little bit more because it's going through the bead, sewing. You're sewing it onto the bead, so there's a little bit more thread showing. But yeah, so these are they. So happy snowflake making, and I hope everyone has a good holiday season, and take care. And miigwech for joining.